Picture this. A 9-year-old girl standing alone at an airport gate, surrounded by airline staff in crisp uniforms. Corporate executives are pacing nearby, phones pressed to their ears, their faces tight with panic. Security personnel hover at a distance, unsure of what they're witnessing. And in the middle of it all stands this little girl, calm, quiet, clutching a butterfly necklace around her neck. This little girl's simple request for a blanket would cost someone their entire career, expose a billion-dollar company's dark secret, and change aviation policy forever. But how did asking for a blanket lead to all of this? This is the story of Debby Kingston, and what happened 30,000 feet above the ground on a March night that nobody on Flight 2847 would ever forget. Debby Kingston was 9 years old, a fourth grader living in Greenwich, Connecticut. If you passed her on the street, you'd see a shy girl with careful eyes, the kind of kid who observes more than she speaks. She lived in one of those sprawling Connecticut estates with her father, James Kingston, the billionaire founder and CEO of Kingston Petroleum International. You might recognize the name from business headlines or Forbes lists, but to Debby he was just dad. A dad who was often on conference calls at breakfast and flying to Dubai for emergency board meetings, but a dad who never, ever missed one of her basketball games. That promise meant everything because Debby's mother had passed away when Debby was only 5 years old. 4 years had gone by, but Debby still wore her mother's butterfly necklace every single day. The delicate silver chain with its tiny butterfly pendant never left her neck. She'd touch it when she was nervous, hold it when she missed her mom, kiss it before every basketball game. Her mother had also given her a journal, a beautiful leather-bound book with cream-colored pages, and Debby wrote in it almost every night. Thoughts about school, about basketball, about missing her mom, about wondering if her mother was watching from somewhere beyond. Basketball was Debby's escape, her joy, her place where everything made sense. She was the point guard for the Silverbrook Academy under-10 girls basketball team, and she was good. Really good. Quick feet, sharp passes, and a three-point shot that made coaches from other schools take notice. Debby was also the only black girl on her team, but if you asked any of her teammates about that, they'd look at you confused. To them, Debby was just Debby. Their best player, their friend, the girl who always shared her snacks and remembered everyone's birthday. Her teammates adored her. There was Sloane Pemberton, the team captain and Debby's closest friend, a tall girl with endless energy who made everyone laugh. Hadley Whitmore, who played center and collected lucky pennies. Reese Vandermeer, their power forward who could out-rebound girls twice her size. Piper Sutton, Quinn Blackwood, Nola Ashford, and 5 others who formed this tight-knit group of 9 and 10-year-olds who'd been playing together for 3 years. And then something incredible happened. Silverbrook Academy qualified for the National Youth Basketball Finals in Portland, Oregon. The National Finals. These girls had worked for this moment their entire young basketball lives. When Coach Marianne Rothschild gathered them after their final qualifying game and told them they were going to Portland, the gymnasium erupted in screams and tears and group hugs that lasted 10 minutes. Assistant coach Devin Hayes had to calm them down enough to even explain the logistics. This was the biggest tournament of their lives. Most of these girls had never been to the West Coast. More importantly, this was the first time most of them would be flying without their parents. Permission slips were signed, emergency contacts were triple-checked, and parents gave tearful speeches about responsibility and staying together. James Kingston wanted everything to be perfect for Debby and her team. Even though he couldn't join them, an emergency board meeting in Dubai demanded his presence that same week. He made arrangements. He booked the entire team business class seats on Meridian Atlantic Airways, Flight 2847 JFK to Portland. Business class for a youth basketball team. Leather seats, extra legroom, premium service. He also sent his trusted assistant, Marcus Whitfield, to chaperone the group and make sure everything ran smoothly. Marcus had worked for James Kingston for 7 years. He was organized, attentive, and genuinely cared about Debby. James trusted him completely. Before the team left for the airport, James knelt down to Debby's eye level in their home and held both her hands. "Baby girl, I'm so sorry I can't be there for this one. You know I'd be there if I could." Debby nodded, touching her butterfly necklace. "I know, Dad. Mom's meeting is important. Your tournament is important too. Marcus is going to take great care of you and the team. And I'll be watching every game on the live stream from Dubai, okay? Every single one. Okay, Dad. Make me proud. But more than that, make yourself proud. Your mom is watching too." Debby hugged him tight, and James held his daughter like he didn't want to let go. The team met at JFK Airport on the evening of March 14th, a Tuesday. 12 girls in matching Silverbrook warm-up jackets, navy blue with gold lettering, bouncing with excitement in the departures terminal. Parents took photos, gave last hugs, reminded their daughters to listen to the coaches. Coach Rothschild and assistant coach Hayes did head counts 3 times. Marcus Whitfield checked everyone's boarding passes and government IDs, organized and efficient as always. Flight 2847 was scheduled to depart at 7:30 p.m., arriving in Portland around 11 p.m. local time. A red-eye flight, but the girls were too excited to care about sleep. They chatted and laughed through security, took silly photos at the gate and counted down the minutes until boarding. When boarding was finally called for business class, the Silverbrook team walked down the jet bridge together, a parade of navy and gold. The aircraft was a wide body with spacious business class seating. As they entered, they were greeted by the flight crew. The head flight attendant was a woman named Cressida Vaughn. Cressida had been with Meridian Atlantic for 15 years, and it showed in every detail of her appearance. Her uniform was immaculate, not a wrinkle anywhere. Her hair was pulled back in a flawless bun. Her makeup was precise, professional. Her smile was perfectly practiced, the kind of smile that was trained rather than genuine. Cold around the edges. "Welcome aboard, ladies," Cressida said in a voice that was pleasant but distant. "Business class is rows 1 through 6. Please find your seats and stow your belongings." Behind her stood 2 junior flight attendants. Tallulah Brixton was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a warm face and nervous energy. Gemma Hollis was a bit older, efficient and quiet. Both greeted the team with genuine smiles. The girls filed into business class, marveling at the wide leather seats, the legroom, the little amenity kits waiting at each seat. Marcus Whitfield took a seat in row 5, directly behind where most of the girls were sitting, and immediately opened his laptop to catch up on work. Coach Rothschild and Coach Hayes sat in row 1, going over tournament brackets. Debbie found her seat by the window in row 3, right next to Sloane Pemberton. Sloane immediately started exploring all the seat's features, pressing buttons to recline, finding the USB ports, pulling out the safety card. "Debbie, this is so cool. Your dad is the best for getting us these seats." Debbie smiled, a small shy smile, and clutched her mother's butterfly necklace between her fingers. She loved flying, loved watching the ground fall away and the clouds come closer. Her mother used to tell her that butterflies could fly higher than most people thought, and every time Debbie flew, she imagined her mother up there somewhere among the clouds. The other girls settled in around them. Hadley and Reese sat across the aisle, already arguing about which movie to watch. Piper, Quinn, and Nola were in row 4 taking selfies. The energy in business class was electric, a mix of pre-tournament jitters and the pure excitement of adventure. Cressida Vaughn moved through the cabin doing her pre-flight safety checks, ensuring overhead bins were closed, seat belts were fastened, tray tables were up. She moved with practiced efficiency, barely making eye contact with any of the passengers. Tallulah and Gemma were more personable, chatting with the girls, asking about their tournament, wishing them luck. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard, announcing the flight time of 5 hours and 42 minutes, wishing everyone a pleasant flight. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway, and as the engines roared to life and the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Debbie pressed her face to the window and watched New York City drop away beneath them. The lights of the city glittered like scattered diamonds. Sloane grabbed her hand and squeezed. "We're going to Nationals, Debbie." "Nationals?" Debbie squeezed back, smiling wider now. "I know. I can't believe it." The plane climbed smoothly into the March night sky, leaving the East Coast behind and heading west toward Portland, toward the tournament, toward a moment that would change everything. None of them knew what was coming. Not Debbie, not her teammates, not Marcus Whitfield, not even Cressida Vaughn herself. But in less than 2 hours, a simple request for a blanket would set off a chain of events that would reach corporate boardrooms, legal departments, and newsrooms across the country. If you're already hooked by Debbie's story and want to see how this all unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss what happens next. Now here's a question for you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced being treated differently on a flight or in any public space? Drop your experience in the comments below. Your story matters. But let me take you back to Flight 2847, cruising at 37,000 feet, where everything was about to go terribly wrong. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed for night service. If you've ever flown cross-country at night, you know that moment when the bright overhead lights fade to a soft amber glow, when the flight attendants move through the aisles with hushed voices, when the hum of the engines becomes almost meditative. Most passengers welcome this transition. It's the signal that it's time to rest, to close your eyes, to let the hours pass until landing. But something else happens when those lights dim. The temperature drops. It's a strange physics of air travel that when the cabin lights go down, the air conditioning seems to work harder. The recycled air gets colder. What was comfortable an hour ago suddenly feels chilly. Your arms get goosebumps. You wish you'd worn a sweater. And if you're a 9-year-old girl in a basketball warm-up jacket, you start to feel that cold creep in, settle into your bones, make you want to curl up and get warm. The girls had been entertained for those first 2 hours. They'd watched movies on their seatback screens, eaten the surprisingly decent business class meals, whispered and giggled across the aisles about the tournament ahead. But now, as the cabin dimmed, exhaustion started to hit. Some of the girls yawned. Others stretched. The excitement was giving way to the reality of a long flight, and sleep was starting to sound like a good idea. That's when Cressida Vaughn and Tallulah Brixton emerged from the galley, pushing a cart loaded with neatly folded blankets and plump pillows wrapped in plastic. Standard night service. Every passenger in business class would receive 1 blanket and 1 pillow to make the rest of the flight more comfortable. It's one of those small luxuries that separates business class from economy, that makes a 5-hour flight bearable. Cressida took the lead, moving down the aisle with her practiced efficiency. Tallulah followed, assisting, learning from the senior flight attendant. They started in row 1 with Coach Rothschild and Coach Hayes, handing them each a blanket and pillow. Then moved to row 2. In row 3, Sloane Pemberton received her blanket first. Tallulah handed it to her with a smile, and Sloane immediately unfolded it, a soft fleece blanket in Meridian Atlantic's signature deep blue. She wrapped it around herself and sighed with contentment. Across the aisle, Hadley Whitmore and Reese Vandermeer each got their blankets. Hadley tucked hers around her legs. Reese pulled hers up to her chin, already half asleep. Row 4. Piper Sutton, Quinn Blackwood, Nola Ashford. Blankets distributed, pillows handed over. The girls murmured their thanks, settling in, getting cozy. And then Cressida reached Debbie's seat. Debbie sat by the window, still watching the darkness outside, the occasional lights of a city far below breaking through the clouds. She heard Sloane rustling with her blanket next to her, felt the slight brush of fabric as Sloane got comfortable. Debbie turned her head, expecting to see Cressida or Tallulah standing there with a blanket for her. But Cressida's eyes passed right over her. Not a glance. Not a pause. Not even a moment of eye contact. Cressida's gaze moved from Sloane, past Debbie as if she weren't there, to the seat behind them. She continued down the aisle to row 5, where Marcus Whitfield sat working on his laptop. Marcus received his blanket without looking up, muttering a distracted thank you. Debbie blinked. She looked down at her empty lap, then back toward the aisle. Maybe they'd come back. Maybe they'd run out temporarily and would bring more. Maybe it was just an oversight. The cart moved further back. Rows 6, 7, 8. Every passenger received a blanket. Every single one. Tallulah and Cressida worked efficiently, professionally, ensuring that everyone in the business class cabin was taken care of. Everyone except Debbie. 5 minutes passed. Debbie started to feel the cold more acutely now. Everyone around her was wrapped in blankets, settling into sleep, but Debbie sat there in just her Silverbrook warm-up jacket, the thin athletic material doing little against the airplane's cold recycled air. She pulled the jacket tighter around herself, zipped it all the way up, but it wasn't enough. 10 minutes. Debbie's arms had goosebumps now. She tucked her hands into her jacket pockets, trying to warm her fingers. She glanced around the cabin. Every other girl on her team was bundled up, comfortable, some already dozing. Marcus had his blanket draped over his lap while he typed. Even passengers she could see in the rows ahead all had blankets. Just not her. 15 minutes passed. Debbie was shivering now, subtle tremors that she tried to hide. She didn't want to make a fuss. Her mother had always taught her to be polite, to not cause trouble, to handle things quietly and with grace. But she was cold. Really cold. And she couldn't understand why she'd been skipped. Sloane Pemberton noticed. She'd been scrolling through movie options on her screen when she glanced over and saw Debbie huddled in her seat, arms wrapped around herself, no blanket anywhere in sight. "Debbie, where's your blanket?" Debbie shrugged, trying to seem like it wasn't a big deal. "They didn't give me one." "What? Why not?" "I don't know. I think they forgot." Sloane immediately started to unfold her own blanket, preparing to share. "Here, we can split mine. It's big enough for both of us." But Debbie shook her head. She was shy, yes, but she was also proud. She didn't want charity from her friend when she should have received her own blanket like everyone else. "No, it's okay. I'll just ask for one. I'm sure they have extras." Sloane looked uncertain but nodded. "Okay, but if they don't bring you one, you're sharing mine. I'm not letting you freeze." Debbie managed a small smile and reached up to press the call button above her seat. The soft ding echoed in the quiet cabin. A few passengers glanced over, then went back to their movies or their sleep. 2 minutes later, Tallulah Brixton appeared at Debbie's row. Tallulah was young, probably only a few years out of training, and she had one of those genuinely kind faces that made you feel like she actually cared. She leaned down slightly, her voice gentle. "Hi sweetie, did you need something?" Debbie looked up at her, polite as always, her voice small. "Excuse me, I didn't get a blanket. Could I have one please?" Tallulah's face registered surprise, then confusion. Her eyes darted to Sloane's blanket, to the empty space on Debbie's lap, back to Debbie. "Oh, of course honey. I'm so sorry. Let me grab one for you right now." Relief washed over Debbie's face. "See, it was just a mistake. Everything would be fine now." Tallulah headed back toward the galley, her pace quick. Debbie waited, expecting her to return in seconds with a blanket. She could already imagine wrapping it around herself, feeling the warmth seep in, finally being comfortable like everyone else. But 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Tallulah still hadn't returned. Finally, after what felt like forever, Tallulah came back down the aisle. But her face had changed. The warmth was still there, but now there was something else underneath it. Discomfort. Awkwardness. The look of someone who's been told to deliver bad news she doesn't agree with. She stopped at Debbie's row and crouched down so she was at eye level with the 9-year-old. Her voice was apologetic, almost pained. "I'm so sorry, sweetie, but Cressida says we've run out of blankets in this cabin." Debbie stared at her, not understanding. "Run out?" "Yes, honey. I'm really sorry." Confusion flooded Debbie's face, followed by something else. The dawning realization that something wasn't right. "But everyone else got one just now? I watched you hand them out." Tallulah fidgeted with her hands, couldn't quite meet Debbie's eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. We had exact count for the passengers, but maybe one was miscounted somewhere. These things happen sometimes." Sloane leaned over, her voice rising slightly. "That doesn't make sense. You just walked down the aisle 5 minutes ago. How could you run out?" Tallulah looked even more uncomfortable now, glancing back toward the galley as if hoping for backup or an escape route. "I really am sorry. I wish I could do more. How about I get you an extra pillow instead? Would that help?" An extra pillow. As if that would somehow make up for being cold for the next 3 hours of flight. As if a pillow could replace the blanket that every single other passenger had received. But Debbie, trained in politeness, nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you." Tallulah disappeared again and returned quickly with a pillow, which she handed to Debbie with an apologetic smile. Then she retreated back down the aisle, her shoulders tense. Debbie held the pillow in her lap, staring down at it. She could feel Sloane staring at her, could sense her friend's anger building. Around them, other girls were starting to notice. Hadley leaned across the aisle. "Debbie, what happened? Why don't you have a blanket?" "They said they ran out." "Ran out?" Hadley's voice was incredulous. "But we all just got ours." Reese Vandermeer, sitting next to Hadley, sat up straighter. "That's ridiculous. That lady walked right past you earlier." "I saw it." The murmurs spread. Piper, Quinn, Nola, the other girls all tuning into what was happening. Their friend, their teammate, their best player sitting there cold and confused while everyone else was wrapped up warm. Something was wrong. These 9 and 10-year-old girls might not have understood the full implications of what was happening, but they knew unfair when they saw it. And someone else had been watching too. Marcus Whitfield had his laptop open, but he hadn't been focused on work for the past several minutes. He'd been observing the blanket distribution from his seat in row 5. He'd seen Cressida walk past Debbie without a glance. He'd seen Tallulah's uncomfortable conversation. And now he saw a 9-year-old girl, the daughter of his boss, a child he'd promised to look after, sitting there shivering while every other passenger was comfortable. Marcus closed his laptop, stood up and stepped into the aisle. He approached Tallulah, who was near the galley area, his voice professional but firm. "Excuse me. I'm traveling with this basketball team. Is there truly no blanket available for this child?" Tallulah looked up at him, and Marcus could see the distress in her young face. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said quietly, "I need to check with Cressida." She disappeared into the galley and Marcus waited, his jaw tight. Less than a minute later, Cressida Vaughn emerged, Tallulah trailing behind her. Cressida's expression was pleasant, professional, but there was something cold underneath it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Is there a problem, sir?" Marcus kept his voice level, controlled. "Yes. The young girl in row 3 didn't receive a blanket during distribution. I'd like one brought to her, please." Cressida's smile remained fixed. Sir, as I told my colleague, we've distributed all business class blankets according to manifest. I'm afraid we don't have any remaining. I watched you distribute blankets 10 minutes ago, Marcus said, his voice still calm but with an edge now. I watched you skip over this child specifically. There were clearly enough blankets for every passenger. Something flickered in Cressida's eyes. Annoyance maybe. Or something darker. But her voice remained professionally pleasant, even as the words turned to steel. Sir, I've been flying for 15 years. I assure you, I know how to count inventory and manage cabin supplies. Perhaps you miscounted the number of passengers. We had the exact allotment for this flight. Marcus felt his anger rising but kept it in check. He pulled out his phone. Then I'm going to need to speak with your supervisor. What's the name of your flight service manager? Cressida's smile got colder. Sir, I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I am the supervisor. And if you continue to cause a disruption and interfere with crew duties, I'll have to file a report, which could result in consequences for your travel privileges. The threat hung in the air between them. Marcus stared at her and Cressida stared back, neither backing down. It was a stalemate, a battle of wills 37,000 feet above the ground. Marcus knew he could push further, could demand to speak to the captain, could make a bigger scene. But he also knew what that might lead to. Airplane crew have enormous power. They can have passengers removed, banned from airlines, even arrested upon landing. And he had 12 girls in his care, a tournament to get to, responsibilities. Marcus made a choice he would regret for weeks afterward. He took a breath, nodded once and returned to his seat. But his phone was out, and his fingers were flying across the keyboard, typing furiously. He was documenting everything. Every detail. Timestamps, names, exactly what was said. And he was composing a message to James Kingston in Dubai, explaining what had just happened to his daughter. Back in row 3, Debby had watched the entire confrontation. She'd seen Marcus stand up for her, seen the flight attendant's cold dismissal, seen Marcus sit back down. And she understood, even at 9 years old, what had just happened. She hadn't been forgotten. She hadn't been miscounted. She'd been deliberately skipped. Debby sat very still in her seat, her hands clutching her mother's butterfly necklace. She could feel the tears building behind her eyes, hot and stinging, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry. She couldn't. Not here, not in front of everyone. Sloane leaned close to her, whispered fiercely, "This isn't right, Debby. She skipped you on purpose. I saw her look right past you." Around them, the other girls were fully aware now, and they were getting angry. These were Debby's teammates, her friends, girls who'd spent 3 years playing basketball together, celebrating wins, consoling each other after losses. They were a team, and someone had just hurt one of their own. Hadley Whitmore unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned far across the aisle, holding out her own blanket. "Debby, take mine. I'm not even cold." "No, take mine," Reese Vandermeer said, already pulling her blanket off. "I'll be fine." Piper, Quinn and Nola were leaning forward from row 4. "We'll share ours with Hadley and Reese. Debby, please take a blanket." But Debby shook her head at all of them, her voice small but firm. "No, I'm okay." Really? She wasn't okay. She was cold and confused and hurt in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. But accepting their blankets would mean admitting what had happened, would make it real, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Reese Vandermeer, usually quiet and focused, spoke up, her voice sharp with anger. "I'm telling my parents as soon as we land. This is messed up." In row 1, Coach Marianne Rothschild had been reviewing tournament brackets on her tablet, going over plays and strategies with assistant coach Devin Hayes. But the murmuring from the rows behind them had been growing, and finally Coach Rothschild unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, turning to look back at her team. She saw immediately that something was wrong. Her girls weren't settling down for sleep. They were agitated, clustered together, whispering intensely. And in the middle of it all, Debby Kingston sat by the window with no blanket, her arms wrapped around herself. Coach Rothschild walked back down the aisle, her face concerned. "Girls, what's going on?" 6 voices erupted at once, all trying to explain. Sloane was the loudest. "Coach, the flight attendant skipped Debby when she gave out blankets. Then she lied and said they ran out, but we all just got ours. Marcus tried to get her one, and the lady threatened him. It's not fair, Coach." Debby's freezing. Coach Rothschild's face changed. It went from concern to hard, her jaw setting in that way the girls recognized from games when a referee made a bad call. She looked at Debby and her voice softened. "Honey, is this true? You didn't get a blanket?" Debby nodded, not trusting her voice. Coach Rothschild's eyes flashed with anger. She turned on her heel and marched toward the galley at the front of the cabin, her stride purposeful. The girls watched as their coach disappeared into the galley area where the flight attendants prepared meals and supplies. What happened next they couldn't see but they could hear. Raised voices from behind the galley curtain. Coach Rothschild's voice, tight with controlled fury. Cressida Vaughn's voice, cold and defensive. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes but it felt longer. Other passengers were starting to notice now, looking up from their movies and their sleep. Finally, Coach Rothschild emerged from the galley. Her face was flushed and she looked furious and helpless at the same time. It was an expression the girls had never seen on their usually confident coach, and it scared them more than anything else had. Coach Rothschild returned to Debbie's row and crouched down in the aisle. Her voice was gentle but there was rage simmering underneath. Girls, will handle this when we land. I promise you. This isn't right and it's not going to be ignored. Debbie, honey, you take my blanket. She started to pull off her own blanket, but Debbie shook her head. No, coach. You need it too. I'm fine. Debbie? I'm fine, Debbie repeated, and there was something in her voice now, a quiet strength that surprised even herself. I don't want anyone else's blanket. I'll be okay. Coach Rothschild looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them. An understanding. A recognition that this was about more than just being cold, that accepting someone else's blanket would somehow feel like giving in, like accepting that what had happened was okay. All right, honey, Coach Rothschild said softly. But if you change your mind, you tell me. Okay. Debbie nodded. Coach Rothschild stood up, exchanged a look with Marcus Whitfield, who nodded grimly and then returned to her seat. But she didn't go back to her tournament planning. She sat there staring straight ahead, her mind clearly racing, planning what she would do when they landed. The cabin settled into an uneasy quiet. The movie screens flickered with images no one was really watching. The hum of the engines continued, steady and unchanging. 3 more hours until Portland. And Debby Kingston sat by the window, cold and confused, with no blanket while every other passenger slept in comfort. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her mother's journal, the leather-bound book that went everywhere with her. She clicked on her overhead reading light, the only one illuminated in the darkened cabin, and opened to a fresh page. By the dim light, while everyone around her slept wrapped in warmth, Debbie began to write. Dear Mom, she wrote in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, something happened today that I don't understand. A lady was mean to me on the airplane. I don't know why. I was polite. I said please. But she wouldn't give me a blanket like she gave everyone else. Dad always says when people are mean, it says more about them than about us. But Mom, why was she mean? What did I do wrong? Debbie paused, her pen hovering over the page, then continued. I'm cold, but I don't want to take someone else's blanket. That doesn't feel right. I just want my own like everyone else got. Is that wrong? I wish you were here. You'd know what to do. You always knew what to do. She wrote for 10 more minutes, pouring out her confusion and hurt onto the pages, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. Finally, she closed the journal, tucked it back into her backpack and turned off her reading light. The cabin was dark now. Most passengers were asleep, their breathing soft and steady. Sloane was dozing next to her, her blanket pulled up to her chin. Across the aisle, Hadley and Reese were both asleep. Behind her, she could hear the quiet clicking of Marcus's laptop keyboard. He was still awake, still working, still documenting. Debbie pulled her Silverbrook jacket as tight as it would go, tucked her hands into her armpits for warmth, and curled up as small as she could in her seat. She rested her head against the cold airplane window and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. She was too cold, too confused, too hurt. So she lay there for 3 hours, shivering quietly, while Flight 2847 carried them west through the March night toward Portland, toward the tournament, toward a reckoning that none of them could yet imagine. And somewhere in the front galley, Cressida Vaughn went about her duties with practiced efficiency, never once glancing back at row 3, never once acknowledging what she'd done. But everything that happened in those 2 hours would be remembered. Every witness. Every conversation. Every cold, deliberate choice. The blanket that Debby Kingston never received would change everything. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and felt powerless to stop it? Share your story in the comments below because these moments matter and your voice matters. And if you want to see how this story ends, how a 9-year-old girl's quiet strength would bring down an entire system of discrimination, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. At 11:47 p.m. Pacific Time, Flight 2847 touched down at Portland International Airport. The wheels hit the runway with that distinctive double thump, the engines reversed with a roar, and the aircraft decelerated smoothly. Inside the business class cabin, passengers stirred from sleep, stretching, yawning, reaching for phones to turn off airplane mode. But the Silverbrook Academy basketball team wasn't stretching or yawning or reaching for phones with excitement. They were subdued, exhausted, angry. The energy that had filled the cabin during takeoff in New York had evaporated somewhere over the Midwest, replaced by something heavy and wrong. These were 9- and 10-year-old girls who should have been buzzing with excitement about the national finals, about being in a new city, about the adventure ahead. Instead, they sat quietly in their seats, exchanging glances, whispering to each other, shooting looks toward the front galley where Cressida Vaughn was preparing for deplaning. Debby Kingston had barely moved for the last hour of the flight. She'd stayed curled up by the window, her Silverbrook jacket wrapped tight around her, her arms tucked against her body for warmth. When the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers started gathering their belongings, Debby moved slowly, mechanically. She pulled her backpack from under the seat in front of her. She checked that her mother's journal was safely inside. She touched the butterfly necklace at her throat, a gesture that had become almost constant during the flight. Sloane Pemberton stayed close to her, a protective presence. "You okay?" she whispered for probably the 20th time. Debby nodded, but it was a lie and both girls knew it. The team gathered their belongings, basketball bags, backpacks, neck pillows, the blankets that everyone except Debby had been given. Coach Rothschild and Coach Hayes did a head count, made sure everyone had everything, and then they began moving toward the exit. Marcus Whitfield brought up the rear, his laptop bag over his shoulder, his phone in his hand, his jaw still tight with controlled anger. As they filed down the aisle toward the exit, Cressida Vaughn took her position at the doorway, the place where flight attendants stand to bid farewell to passengers. She stood there in her immaculate uniform, her hair still perfectly arranged despite the 5-hour flight, her smile fixed and professional. Tallulah and Gemma stood behind her, looking significantly less composed. One by one the Silverbrook girls passed by. "Thank you for flying Meridian Atlantic," Cressida said to Sloane, making direct eye contact, her smile warm and practiced. "Enjoy your stay in Portland." "Thank you for flying Meridian Atlantic," she said to Hadley, meeting her eyes. "Enjoy your stay in Portland." "Thank you for flying Meridian Atlantic," to Reese, to Piper, to Quinn, to Nola, to each and every girl on the team. Eye contact with every single one. The same scripted farewell delivered with the same professional pleasantness. And then Debby walked past. Cressida's eyes moved over her, past her, through her as if she were invisible. Not a glance. Not a word. Not even an acknowledgement that a human being was passing 2 feet in front of her. The smile remained on Cressida's face, but her gaze was already on the passenger behind Debby, already forming the words for the next farewell. Debby felt it like a physical blow. That deliberate erasure. That conscious choice to pretend she didn't exist. She kept walking, her face carefully neutral, but her hands gripped the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles went white. Coach Rothschild, who had been several passengers ahead, had turned back and seen the whole thing. Her face flushed dark with rage. She took a step back toward Cressida, but Coach Hayes grabbed her arm, shook his head slightly. "Not here. Not now." They had 12 girls to get to a hotel, a tournament starting in less than 12 hours. There would be time for this fight, but not in the doorway of an airplane. Marcus Whitfield was the last to deplane. When he reached Cressida, she offered him the same smile, the same scripted farewell. Marcus didn't return the smile. He looked directly at her name tag, memorizing it, then looked her in the eye. "I hope you're proud of yourself," he said quietly and walked past. Cressida's smile flickered, just for a second, before resetting to its default position. The team made their way through the terminal toward baggage claim. Portland International at nearly midnight was quiet, mostly empty, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. The girls walked in a tight cluster, nobody talking much. Some of them had their arms around Debby, flanking her protectively. Others shot angry glances back toward the gates, as if Cressida might still be visible. At baggage claim, while they waited for the carousel to start moving, Marcus stepped away from the group, phone pressed to his ear. The girls couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but they could see his body language, tense, urgent, pacing back and forth. His free hand gestured as he spoke, emphasis on points the person on the other end couldn't see but could surely hear in his voice. Coach Rothschild gathered the girls while they waited for luggage. Her voice was tired but firm. "All right, ladies, listen up. I know tonight was difficult. I know you're angry and confused and you have every right to be. But we have practice at 8 a.m. and our first tournament game at 2 p.m. We're here for basketball. We're here to win a national championship. So we're going to get to the hotel, we're going to get some sleep, and tomorrow we're going to play like the champions you are. Understood. A murmur of agreement, half-hearted at best. As for what happened on the plane, Coach continued, her voice hardening, that's being handled. By me, by Marcus, by people much more powerful than that flight attendant. Justice takes time, but it's coming. For now, you support each other, you support Debby, and you focus on why we're here. Can you do that? Stronger agreement this time. These were basketball players and their coach had just given them a game plan. They could follow a game plan. Luggage started appearing on the carousel. The girls grabbed their bags, double-checking they had everything. 2 team vans were waiting outside to take them to the hotel, a nice place downtown that James Kingston had arranged. The March night in Portland was cool but not cold, dry after the humidity of New York. The girls loaded into the vans, Debby ending up in the back seat between Sloane and Hadley, both girls pressed close to her in silent solidarity. The hotel was modern and sleek, the lobby quiet at this late hour. Check-in was efficient. Room keys were distributed. The girls were sharing rooms, 2 to a room, and Debby was rooming with Sloane, which everyone agreed was perfect. They needed to be together tonight. By 12:45 a.m., the team was in their rooms. Debby and Sloane's room was on the 8th floor, 2 queen beds with crisp white linens, a view of downtown Portland's lights. Sloane immediately tried to establish some normalcy, unpacking her bag with exaggerated enthusiasm, chattering about the tournament, about how cool Portland seemed, about anything except what had happened on the plane. But Debby was quiet. She went through the motions, unpacking her toiletries, changing into pajamas, brushing her teeth, but she was somewhere else mentally. When Sloane came out of the bathroom, she found Debby sitting on her bed, legs crossed, her mother's journal open in her lap, pen in hand. "Debby?" Sloane said softly. Debby looked up and Sloane could see her friend had been crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm okay," Debby said, wiping at her face. "I just need to write for a bit." Sloane sat down on her own bed, facing Debby. "Do you want to talk about it?" Debby shook her head. "Not yet. I need to write to my mom. She always helped me figure things out." "Okay," Sloane said. "But I'm right here if you need me." "And Debby?" "What that lady did was wrong. Really, really wrong. It wasn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong." Debby nodded, but Sloane could see she didn't quite believe it yet. When you're 9 years old and someone treats you like you're invisible, like you're less than, it's hard not to internalize it, not to wonder what you did to deserve it. Sloane climbed into her bed, leaving the lamp on between them so Debby could write. She lay there, not sleeping, just being present, while Debby bent over her journal and poured her heart onto the pages. 3 floors below them, Marcus Whitfield stood on the balcony of his hotel room, phone to his ear, watching the lights of Portland stretch out into the distance. He'd been trying to reach James Kingston for 20 minutes, knowing it would be morning in Dubai, knowing James would be preparing for his board meeting. Finally, the call connected. "Marcus." James Kingston's voice came through clear and alert despite the distance. "Is everything okay? Did you make it to Portland safely?" Marcus took a breath. This was going to be a difficult conversation. "James, we made it safely, but something happened on the flight. Something involving Debby." The line went silent for a beat, then James's voice came back, different now, sharper, on edge. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "Not physically," Marcus said, and then he explained. Every detail. The blanket distribution where Debby was deliberately skipped. The lie about running out of inventory. His confrontation with Cressida Vaughn. The threat she'd made. Debby sitting cold for 3 hours while every other passenger had a blanket. The way Cressida ignored Debby again when they deplaned. Marcus spoke for 5 straight minutes, laying out the incident with the precision of someone who'd been documenting everything. When he finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Not the silence of a dropped call, but the silence of a man processing information, his anger building like pressure in a sealed container. When James Kingston finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath it was something molten and dangerous. "She deliberately denied my daughter a blanket because of the color of her skin." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a recognition of an ugly truth. "Yes," Marcus said simply. Another silence, longer this time. Marcus could almost hear James thinking, calculating, planning. When James spoke again, his voice had changed. It was the voice Marcus recognized from boardrooms and negotiations, the voice of a man who'd built an empire and wasn't accustomed to anyone mistreating what belonged to him, and Debby was his world, Marcus, I need you to do exactly as I say. Are you ready to take notes? Marcus pulled out the small notepad he always carried. Ready. First, get me the names of every crew member on that flight. Full names, employee numbers if possible. I want to know exactly who was working that cabin. Marcus scribbled. Done. I already have the head flight attendant's name, Cressida Vaughn. I'll get the others. Second, file a formal complaint with Meridian Atlantic Corporate. Not customer service. I want it to go directly to their executive offices. Use my name, use my legal team's letterhead. I want it time-stamped and documented with every detail you just told me. Understood. Third, document everything. And I mean everything. Every girl on that team is a witness. Get statements from them if you can, from the coaches definitely. Write down exact times, exact words spoken. Create a timeline. This needs to be airtight. Marcus was writing faster now. Got it? Fourth, and here James's voice dropped even lower, more intense. Get me the CEO of Meridian Atlantic on the phone within 6 hours. I don't care that it's the middle of the night in New York. I don't care if you have to go through 5 assistants. I want to speak directly to Richard Halstead by morning. Marcus hesitated. James, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but my daughter was discriminated against on an airplane. James's voice cut through the objection like a blade. My 9-year-old daughter. She was treated like she was invisible, like she didn't deserve the same basic courtesy as every other passenger because of how she looks. Her mother would never forgive me if I let this go. Hell, I'd never forgive myself. So get me that CEO, Marcus. Get me Richard Halstead, and let him know that James Kingston is about to become his biggest problem. Marcus felt the weight of those words, the inevitability in them. When James Kingston set his mind to something, it happened. That's how you build an oil empire. That's how you change the world. And right now, all that power, all that influence, all that relentless determination was focused on one thing. Justice for his daughter. I'll make it happen, Marcus said. Good. And Marcus? Thank you for looking after her. I know you tried to help on that plane. I know you stood up for her. I should have done more. You did what you could in an impossible situation. Now we do what comes next. Keep me updated every step of the way. I'll be on the first flight I can get to Portland after this board meeting. 48 hours maximum. Understood. James? Debbie's okay. Shaken but okay. She's strong like her mother. James's voice cracked slightly for the first time in the conversation. She shouldn't have to be strong about something like this. She's 9 years old. She should be excited about her tournament, not writing in her journal about why someone hated her for no reason. We'll make this right. Damn right we will. Talk soon, Marcus. The call ended. Marcus stood on his balcony for another moment, looking out at Portland, then went back inside. He opened his laptop and got to work. He pulled up the Meridian Atlantic website, found the corporate contact information, and began composing a formal complaint. He detailed every moment of the incident with timestamps. He listed all 12 girls as witnesses, plus both coaches. He made it clear that this wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident, but a deliberate act of discrimination against a child. By 2 a.m., the complaint was filed, marked urgent, sent to multiple departments within Meridian Atlantic. Marcus had also managed to get the names of all crew members from the flight manifest. A contact at the airline he'd dealt with before for James's travel arrangements had quietly provided the information. Then Marcus started working on getting Richard Halstead, CEO of Meridian Atlantic Airways, on the phone. He sent emails to executive assistants. He left messages with answering services. He pulled every string and called in every favor he had in the aviation industry. The message was consistent. James Kingston needs to speak with Mr. Halstead immediately regarding a serious incident on Flight 2847. It's urgent. By 3 a.m. Marcus had done everything he could. He set an alarm for 6 a.m. and tried to get a few hours of sleep, knowing the next day was going to be long and complicated. Morning came too quickly. At 7 a.m., the Silverbrook Academy basketball team gathered in the hotel lobby for breakfast, then loaded into vans for the short drive to the tournament venue. The girls were subdued, exhausted from the late night and the emotional toll of the flight. But as they arrived at the basketball arena and saw the banners, saw the other teams warming up, saw the championship courts, something shifted. They were here for basketball. They were here to compete. And maybe, just maybe, focusing on the game would help them process what had happened. The arena was massive, 6 courts set up side by side, teams from across the country warming up simultaneously. The noise was incredible. Basketballs bouncing, whistles blowing, coaches shouting instructions, parents cheering from the stands. The Silverbrook girls changed into their uniforms, navy blue with gold trim, and took to their assigned court for warm-ups. Debby went through the drills mechanically. Layup lines, passing drills, three-point shooting. Her body knew what to do, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice, but her mind wasn't fully present. She kept touching her mother's necklace between drills. Her eyes were distant. Sloane and the other girls stayed close, encouraging her, trying to bring her back. At 2 p.m. their first game began. Silverbrook Academy versus Mountain Ridge from Colorado. The ref blew the whistle for tip-off and the tournament was underway. For the first quarter, Debby struggled. She missed passes she normally made. Her shots were off. Her defensive positioning was a step slow. It was like she was playing in a fog, seeing the game happen around her rather than being fully in it. Mountain Ridge took an early lead, up by 6 points at the end of the first quarter. Coach Rothschild called a timeout. She gathered the team, looked each girl in the eye, and then focused on Debby. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Debby, I need you here with us. I know yesterday was hard. I know you're processing. But right now your team needs you present. Can you give me that?" Debby looked up at her coach, and something in Coach Rothschild's expression, tough love mixed with understanding, broke through the fog. Debby nodded. "Yes, coach. Then let's play basketball." The second quarter was different. Debby found her rhythm. She drove the lane for a layup, hit a three-pointer from the corner, made a steal and went coast to coast for another basket. The Silverbrook girls rallied around her, their plays clicking, their defense tightening. By halftime they'd tied the game. The second half belonged to Silverbrook. They played with intensity, with purpose, with something to prove. Though whether they were proving it to themselves, to their opponents, or to an absent flight attendant back in New York, it was hard to say. Debby scored 12 points total, not her best game but solid. More importantly, she'd broken through the mental barrier, found her focus, remembered why she loved this game. Silverbrook won 64-52. The girls celebrated, hugging each other, high-fiving, relieved and exhausted. They'd won their first game at Nationals. Between games, during a break before their evening game, Coach Rothschild pulled Debby aside to a quiet corner of the arena. They sat on a bench, just the two of them. "Honey, your dad called me this morning." Debby looked up, surprised. "He did?" "Yeah. He's in Dubai, but he wanted me to tell you something. He's handling everything that happened on the plane. Everything. You don't need to worry about it or think about it. He just wants you to focus on basketball and being with your team. Can you do that?" Debby was quiet for a moment, then nodded. But Coach Rothschild could see something had shifted in her, something fundamental. The girl sitting next to her was different from the girl who'd boarded that plane in New York. Quieter. More withdrawn. Like she'd learned something about the world that she couldn't unlearn, and it had changed her. "It's okay to be sad about it," Coach said softly. "It's okay to be angry. What happened was wrong, and it's okay to feel feelings about it." "I just don't understand why," Debby said, her voice small. "I was polite. I said please. I didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing at all. Sometimes people carry hate in their hearts, and it has nothing to do with the people they direct it at. It's about their own brokenness, their own fear, their own smallness. But that doesn't make it hurt less, does it?" Debby shook her head, tears building in her eyes again. Coach Rothschild pulled her into a hug. "Your dad's a powerful man, Debby. If anyone can make sure justice happens, it's him. But in the meantime, you've got a tournament to win and 11 teammates who love you. Lean on them. Let them help carry this for a while." Debby nodded against Coach's shoulder, then pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Okay. That's my girl. Now let's go win another game." That evening, Silverbrook played their second game and won again, advancing in the tournament bracket. Debby played better, scoring 15 points. After the game, Sloane, Hadley, Reese, and the other girls surrounded her in a protective circle, celebrating the win but mostly just being there for their friend. While the Silverbrook girls were playing basketball in Portland, 3,000 miles away in New York, a very different kind of game was beginning. At Meridian Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, the executive offices were having an emergency meeting. It was 8 a.m. Eastern Time when Senior Vice President of Customer Relations Douglas Montclair arrived at his office to find his inbox flooded with red flag messages, all regarding the same incident. Flight 2847, March 14th, formal complaint filed by Marcus Whitfield on behalf of James Kingston. Douglas read the complaint once, then read it again more slowly, his expression growing grimmer with each paragraph. A 9-year-old child. Deliberately skipped during blanket distribution. Lies told about inventory. threats made to the chaperone who intervened. And the complainant was James Kingston, whose name Douglas recognized immediately. You don't work in corporate America without knowing who the billionaire oil magnates are. Douglas immediately pulled the flight manifest for Flight 2847. 12 passengers listed from Silverbrook Academy, all minors. One Marcus Whitfield listed as guardian for travel purposes. Crew, Cressida Vaughn, head flight attendant. Tallulah Brixton and Gemma Hollis, junior attendants. 2 more crew in economy, not relevant to the business class incident. Next, Douglas accessed what limited footage existed. Airlines don't typically record cabin interiors for privacy reasons, but there were security cameras at gates and in jet bridges. He found footage of the Silverbrook team boarding 12 girls in matching jackets, laughing and excited. He found footage of them deplaning at Portland, the same 12 girls now subdued, clustered around one small black girl protectively. He saw Marcus Whitfield on his phone, clearly agitated. But he needed more than footage. He needed testimony. Douglas picked up his phone and called HR. I need contact information for Tallulah Brixton and Gemma Hollis, flight attendants. And I need them brought in for interviews today. Separately. This is priority 1. By 10 a.m., both junior flight attendants had been reached and were on their way to corporate headquarters. Tallulah arrived first at 11:30. She was clearly nervous, fidgeting with her hands as she sat down in the conference room across from Douglas and an HR representative, Paula Vasquez. Am I in trouble? Tallulah asked immediately. No, Douglas said calmly. We just need to understand what happened on Flight 2847 2 nights ago. Can you walk us through the blanket distribution in business class? Tallulah took a breath and began talking. Once she started, the words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in and finally had permission to release them. We were doing night service, blankets and pillows. Cressida was taking the lead and I was helping her. We started in row 1 and moved back. When we got to row 3 there was this little girl by the window. Debby, I learned her name later. She was part of the basketball team. Cressida handed a blanket to the girl in the aisle seat next to her, but then she just skipped over Debby. Like she wasn't there. She moved right to the row behind and kept going. Did you notice this at the time? Douglas asked. I noticed, but I thought maybe Cressida would come back to her. But we finished distributing to everyone else and Debby still didn't have a blanket. About 15 minutes later, Debby pressed her call button, and I went to see what she needed. She asked for a blanket so politely. She said please. She was just a little kid who was cold. Tallulah's eyes were getting watery now. I went to the galley to get her a blanket because we absolutely had extras. I'd counted them myself before we started distribution. But Cressida stopped me. She said to tell Debby we ran out. I said we hadn't run out, I'd just seen them in the storage compartment. And Cressida looked at me and said, I'm the head flight attendant. Tell her we ran out. Paula Vasquez was taking notes rapidly. And what did you do? I did what she said, Tallulah admitted, her voice breaking. I went back and told that little girl we ran out of blankets. I lied to her. I should have pushed back harder, but Cressida's been with the airline for 15 years, and I just finished training 6 months ago. I was scared of getting written up, of getting fired. So I lied, and that little girl sat there cold for the rest of the flight because I was a coward. She was crying now, and Paula handed her a tissue box. You're not in trouble, Douglas repeated gently. But I need to know, have you witnessed behavior like this from Cressida Vaughn before? Tallulah wiped her eyes and nodded. Not exactly like this, but there have been other times when she's been cold or dismissive to certain passengers. Usually black passengers if I'm being honest. I've noticed it. Other crew have noticed it. But it's always subtle, you know? She never says anything explicitly racist. It's just in how she treats people, who she smiles at, who she helps first, who she ignores. And because she's been here so long and has good performance reviews, nobody says anything. Douglas and Paula exchanged a look. This was worse than one incident. This was a pattern. Thank you, Tallulah, Douglas said. You've been very helpful and very honest. We appreciate that. After Tallulah left, Douglas sat back in his chair and rubbed his face. We need to talk to the other junior attendant. If she corroborates this. Gemma Hollis arrived at 1 p.m. She was older than Tallulah, maybe late 30s, and she seemed less nervous and more resigned. She sat down, declined coffee, and waited. Douglas asked the same questions and Gemma answered with the same brutal honesty. Cressida deliberately skipped that child. I was standing right there, I saw the whole thing. The little girl had this necklace she kept touching, looked nervous like kids do on planes. And Cressida looked right past her, handed a blanket to everyone else. When the girl called for help later, I heard Cressida tell Tallulah to say we'd run out. We hadn't. I personally checked the inventory that morning and knew we had extras. Have you seen similar behavior before? Paula asked. Gemma nodded slowly. Cressida has always been particular about certain passengers. I've worked with her maybe a dozen times over the past 3 years. There's a pattern. She's cold toward black passengers specifically. Not overtly hostile, just dismissive. Slower service, less eye contact, forgetting requests. I've noticed it. Other crew have noticed it. But proving it is another matter because she's always careful to have plausible deniability. I didn't hear, I forgot, we ran out, miscount. She's been getting away with it because she's good at her job otherwise, and nobody wants to be the one to formally accuse someone of racism without ironclad proof. Douglas leaned forward. Until now. Until now, Gemma agreed. That little girl and her entire basketball team witnessed it. The man traveling with them witnessed it and tried to intervene. This time there's no plausible deniability. This time she showed her hand. After Gemma left, Douglas sat in the conference room with Paula Vasquez, and they looked at each other with the dawning realization of how serious this was. We need to pull Cressida Vaughn's entire employment record, Douglas said. Every flight she's worked. Every passenger complaint filed. Every crew interaction report. I want to see if there's a pattern we missed. Paula nodded. I'll get HR on it immediately. And Paula? We need to move fast on this. James Kingston is not going to wait for a drawn-out investigation. If we don't handle this properly and quickly, this story is going to be in every newspaper in the country by the end of the week. Over the next 6 hours, a team of HR specialists and data analysts pulled every piece of information related to Cressida Vaughn's 15-year career with Meridian Atlantic. What they found made Douglas Montclair's blood run cold. 17 separate passenger complaints over 3 years. 17. All of them involved black passengers. All of them described similar experiences: dismissive service, being skipped over, requests ignored, cold or hostile treatment. One complaint from August 2022, an elderly black woman who'd asked for help with her overhead luggage, watched Cressida help 3 other passengers, then was told Cressida wasn't able to assist at this time. Another from March 2023, a black businessman in business class who'd been repeatedly ignored during meal service, his requests for drinks forgotten 3 times. Another from November 2023, a black family whose child was told there were no more kids' meal options, despite other children on the flight receiving them. 17 complaints. All logged. All dismissed as misunderstandings or miscommunications. All buried in aggregate performance data that showed Cressida as an exemplary employee overall. But when you isolated just these 17 complaints, the pattern was undeniable. Douglas also found internal emails from Cressida over the years. Nothing explicitly racist, but complaints about difficult passengers and certain types who made flights challenging. Human Resources had reviewed these emails before and found nothing actionable, but read in context with the passenger complaints, they took on a different, darker meaning. By 7 p.m., Douglas Montclair had compiled a comprehensive report. He sent it to the CEO's office with a red flag priority marker and a single-line summary: "We have a serious problem." At 8 p.m. his phone rang. It was Richard Halstead's executive assistant. "Mr. Halstead wants to see you in his office immediately." Douglas grabbed his folder and headed to the executive floor. This was about to become the biggest crisis Meridian Atlantic had faced in years, and it all started with a 9-year-old girl asking for a blanket. And 3,000 miles away in Portland, Debby Kingston was writing in her journal before bed after winning 2 tournament games, still trying to understand why someone had hated her for no reason, not knowing that her father was about to turn that hate into a reckoning that would change an entire airline. If you've ever wondered whether one person can make a difference, whether standing up against injustice actually matters, stay with this story, because what happens next will show you exactly how powerful truth can be when it's backed by determination. Hit that subscribe button now, because the resolution to this story is something you won't want to miss. Have you or someone you know ever filed a formal complaint about discrimination and wondered if it actually led to change? Share your experience in the comments, because your voice and your story matter just as much as Debby's. While Debby Kingston was playing basketball in Portland, trying to focus on the game she loved while processing a pain no 9-year-old should have to understand, 3,000 miles away in a corporate tower in Manhattan, Douglas Montclair was uncovering something that would shake Meridian Atlantic. 17 complaints. 17 separate incidents over 3 years, all involving the same flight attendant, Cressida Vaughn. 17 passengers who had taken the time to file formal complaints. And if you know anything about air travel, you know that for every person who actually files a complaint, there are probably 10 more who experienced something but didn't bother with the paperwork, didn't think it would matter, didn't believe anyone would listen. Douglas read each complaint carefully, and a horrifying picture began to emerge. Complaint number 1, dated August 14, 2022. Flight 1523 Newark to Atlanta. An elderly black woman named Dorothy Hendricks, 73 years old, traveling to visit her grandchildren. She'd written, "I asked the head flight attendant for help placing my carry-on in the overhead bin. She looked at me and said she would return to assist. I watched her help 3 other passengers with their luggage over the next 10 minutes, all younger, all white. When I asked again, she told me she wasn't able to assist at this time and suggested I ask another passenger for help. I felt humiliated and dismissed." The airline's response at the time had been a form letter apologizing for the inconvenience and offering a small flight credit. The incident was logged as crew unable to assist due to other duties. Case closed. Complaint number 2, dated November 3, 2022. Flight 2901 Boston to Dallas. A black college student named Terrence Williams, 20 years old, heading home for Thanksgiving. His complaint: the flight attendant was distributing headphones to passengers in my section. She handed them to every person in rows 12 through 16 except me. When I asked for headphones, she said they'd run out of that particular row's allotment and I'd need to wait. She never came back. I watched other passengers in rows behind me receive headphones. When I pressed my call button, a different flight attendant brought me headphones immediately, looking confused about why I hadn't received any in the first place. The airline's response: possible inventory miscommunication. Apology issued. Case closed. Complaint number 3, dated March 17, 2023. Flight 3847 JFK to Los Angeles, business class. A black businessman named Michael Richardson, 45, partner at a consulting firm, traveling for a client presentation. His complaint was detailed and precise. During meal service, the head flight attendant took orders from every passenger in business class except me. She skipped my row entirely. When I pressed the call button, she returned and asked what I needed with barely concealed annoyance. I ordered the chicken option. 20 minutes later, she returned and informed me they were out of chicken, only beef was available. I accepted the beef. I later observed her serving the chicken option to 3 passengers who'd been served after me. When drink refills were offered, my requests were forgotten 3 separate times. Each time I had to press the call button again. Other passengers received attentive service. By the end of the flight, I felt like I was invisible, or worse, like my presence was an inconvenience. The airline's response: service delays due to busy flight. Meal inventory managed based on order of service. Apology and flight credit offered. Case closed. On and on it went. 17 complaints spanning 3 years. Different flights, different routes, different passengers. But one constant: Cressida Vaughn. And one shared characteristic among all 17 complainants: they were black. Douglas found a complaint from a black mother traveling with her 2 young children. She'd requested a child's meal for her 5-year-old daughter, only to be told they'd run out, despite seeing other children receive kids' meals throughout the flight. The mother had to share her own meal with her hungry daughter for 5 hours. He found a complaint from a black elderly man who'd asked for a blanket on a red-eye flight and been told none were available, only to watch the same flight attendant distribute blankets to the rows around him minutes later. He found a complaint from a black woman who'd paid for an upgrade to premium economy but found her seat assignment had been mistakenly changed back to regular economy at the gate, while the seat she'd paid for went to a standby passenger who was white. When she inquired, Cressida had told her it was a system error, and nothing could be done mid-flight. Every single complaint described the same behaviors: being skipped over, being forgotten, requests ignored or denied, services that were available for other passengers mysteriously unavailable for them. Cold treatment, dismissive tones, the absolute minimum required by policy but none of the warmth or courtesy extended to others. And every single complaint had been logged, reviewed, and dismissed. Why? Because when you looked at Cressida Vaughn's overall performance record, she appeared exemplary. Her passenger satisfaction ratings were high, because the vast majority of her passengers, the ones who received her practiced smile and professional service, had no complaints. She was never late to work. She knew every regulation and procedure. She'd received commendations for her professionalism. On paper, she was a model employee. But those 17 complaints had been buried in aggregate data. When 95% of passengers rate their experience positively, A few negative reviews disappear into statistical noise. And Cressida had been very, very careful. She never said anything explicitly racist. She never used slurs or made comments about race. She always had plausible deniability. We ran out. I didn't see you. I must have missed you. Miscommunication. System error. Inventory mistake. Every excuse was reasonable on its own. Any one incident could genuinely be an accident. But 17 incidents? 17 times where black passengers experienced the exact same pattern of dismissive, inferior service? That wasn't accident. That was intention. Douglas dug deeper. He found internal emails from Cressida to her supervisors and fellow crew members. Again, nothing explicitly racist, she was too smart for that, but the language was telling. Complaints about certain passengers who made flights more difficult. References to challenging demographics on particular routes. Once in an email about a flight to Atlanta she'd written, "That route is always exhausting. The passenger composition requires extra vigilance." Another crew member had responded asking what she meant, and Cressida had replied vaguely about maintaining service standards for everyone, which could mean anything or nothing. HR had reviewed these emails years ago when they'd come up during a routine audit and found nothing actionable. But reading them now, in context with 17 complaints showing a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior, they took on a much darker meaning. Douglas also interviewed more crew members who'd worked with Cressida over the years. Most described her as professional, efficient, a bit cold but competent. But when he specifically asked about her interactions with black passengers or black crew members, a different picture emerged. One flight attendant, a white woman named Sarah who'd worked with Cressida for 5 years, said carefully, "Look, I never saw Cressida say or do anything overtly racist. But there were patterns. She'd assign certain tasks to black crew members that she wouldn't ask of others. Like asking them to clean the bathrooms more often, or handle difficult passengers in economy while she stayed in first class. Little things. Things you could explain away individually, but together they felt intentional." Another crew member, this one a black flight attendant named Jennifer who'd transferred off Cressida's routes 2 years ago, was more direct. "I couldn't prove anything, which is why I never filed a formal complaint. But working with Cressida felt hostile. She'd question my work more than others. She'd make comments about my appearance that felt coded, about my hair, my uniform not being polished enough, even though I followed every regulation. She never socialized with me the way she did with white crew members. I asked to be reassigned because the environment was toxic, but when HR asked why, I just said, scheduling conflicts because I knew no one would believe me without proof." Douglas found Jennifer's transfer request in the records. She'd cited personal scheduling needs. HR had approved it without question. Another red flag missed. The more Douglas uncovered, the clearer it became. Cressida Vaughn had been engaging in subtle, systematic discrimination for years. She'd been clever about it, careful never to leave obvious evidence, always maintaining that professional veneer. She'd chosen her targets strategically, passengers who were alone, who might not have witnesses, who might not have the time or resources to push back hard on a complaint. She'd built up enough goodwill with the majority of passengers that her overall ratings stayed high. She'd created enough plausible deniability that each individual incident could be explained away. But this time was different. This time she targeted a child, a 9-year-old girl who'd done nothing but ask politely for a blanket. This time there were 17 witnesses, 12 girls on a basketball team, 2 coaches, and a chaperone who'd all watched it happen. This time the child's father was James Kingston, a billionaire with unlimited resources and zero tolerance for injustice. This time there was no plausible deniability, no way to explain it away as a miscommunication or an honest mistake. This time, Cressida Vaughn had finally been caught. Douglas compiled everything into a comprehensive report. The 17 previous complaints. The pattern of behavior spanning 3 years. The testimony from Tallulah and Gemma confirming deliberate misconduct on Flight 2847. The interviews with former crew members describing a hostile work environment. The internal emails with their coded language. The passenger testimonies describing identical experiences of being dismissed, ignored, and treated as less than. It was damning. Irrefutable. And it represented a massive failure on Meridian Atlantic's part. Not just that they'd employed someone who discriminated against passengers, but that they'd ignored 17 complaints over 3 years, that they'd allowed this behavior to continue unchecked, that their systems had been inadequate to catch a pattern that, in retrospect, was blindingly obvious. Douglas sent his report to CEO Richard Halstead at 8:45 p.m. with a subject line, Flight 2847 investigation. Critical findings require immediate action. By 9 p.m. his phone rang. Richard Halstead's voice was tight, controlled anger barely leashed. My office. Now. Douglas gathered his materials and headed to the executive floor. The CEO's office was all glass and chrome, views of Manhattan stretching out in every direction. Richard Halstead stood at his desk, Douglas's report displayed on his computer screen, his face grim. Tell me this isn't as bad as it looks, Richard said. Douglas set down his folder. It's worse. We've had 17 complaints about discriminatory behavior from the same employee over 3 years, and we did nothing. Every complaint was logged, every complaint was dismissed. We failed 17 passengers. And now the 18th victim is a 9-year-old child, and her father is about to become our worst nightmare. Richard sat down heavily. How did we miss this? Because she was careful, Douglas said. Never explicit, always plausible deniability, excellent ratings overall. The complaints were statistical noise in the aggregate data. But when you isolate them, the pattern is undeniable. She's been systematically discriminating against black passengers for at least 3 years, probably longer. Can we defend this? No, Douglas said flatly. We can't. We shouldn't. And if we try, we'll destroy this company's reputation. Our only option is to acknowledge the failure, terminate Vaughn immediately, make significant policy changes, and hope James Kingston accepts that we're taking this seriously. Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring at the report. Finally, schedule a meeting with Vaughn tomorrow morning. I want you, me, Paula from HR and legal present. We terminate her immediately. And get our PR team ready, this is going to be public and we need to control the narrative. Already on it, Douglas said. While corporate executives in Manhattan were preparing to end Cressida Vaughn's career, the investigation had also been looking into Cressida herself. Who she was, where she came from, what made a person capable of such sustained, deliberate cruelty. Cressida Vaughn was 42 years old. She'd joined Meridian Atlantic at 15 years ago. Before that, she'd grown up in a small, insular community in rural Pennsylvania. The kind of place where everyone looked the same, thought the same, and strangers were viewed with suspicion. She joined the airline specifically because she wanted to see the world, wanted to escape the narrow confines of her hometown, wanted adventure and diversity and new experiences. But here's the thing about worldview: geography doesn't change it. You can travel the world and never actually expand your perspective if you're not willing to examine your own beliefs and biases. Cressida had flown to dozens of countries, served thousands of passengers from every background imaginable, worked alongside crew members of every race and ethnicity. But her worldview had never actually evolved. She'd brought her small-town prejudices with her into the skies, and they'd calcified over 15 years into something harder and more deliberate. Coworkers who'd known her for years described her as professional but distant. She didn't socialize much with crew members. She kept to herself. And several people, when pressed, admitted she seemed particularly distant toward black colleagues. Not hostile exactly, she was too professional for open hostility, but cold, formal. Never friendly, never warm, never letting those relationships develop beyond the strictly necessary. One white flight attendant who'd been friendly with Cressida years ago said, "We used to have coffee sometimes between flights. She was nice enough, but she had these views. She'd make comments about certain neighborhoods being rough, or certain types of passengers being difficult. I called her out on it once, asked what she meant, and she got defensive and said I was reading too much into it. We stopped having coffee after that." Jennifer, the black flight attendant who'd transferred away, had put it more bluntly: Cressida created a hostile work environment, but she was smart about it. Nothing she did was fireable on its own. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And when I tried to explain that to HR, I could see they thought I was being oversensitive, that I was reading race into things that weren't about race. But when you're the target, you know. You can feel the difference between someone who's just having a bad day and someone who genuinely doesn't think you deserve to be there. HR had dismissed Jennifer's concerns as personality conflicts, as scheduling preferences, as anything except what they actually were: a pattern of discriminatory treatment that made a hostile work environment. The pattern had been there for years. Subtle, deniable, but there. And Meridian Atlantic had missed it, dismissed it, allowed it to continue. Until Cressida made one mistake. She underestimated how much people would care about a 9-year-old girl being denied a blanket. Day 3 of the tournament in Portland. Friday, March 17th. The Silverbrook Academy girls had won their first 2 games and advanced to the championship round. They'd played with intensity and purpose, channeling their anger about what happened to Debby into determination on the court. They were winning not just for themselves but for their teammate, their friend, the girl who'd been treated like she didn't matter. Debby had played well in the first 2 games, but Coach Rothschild could see she was still processing, still withdrawn, still quieter than usual. Between games, Sloane and the other girls stayed close to her, a protective circle of 10-year-olds who understood that their friend was hurting and needed them. On the morning of the championship game, Marcus Whitfield pulled Coach Rothschild aside in the hotel lobby. "James Kingston is flying in today. He'll be at the arena for the championship game." Coach nodded. "How's he handling this?" Marcus's expression was grim. "He's handling it the way James Kingston handles anything that threatens his family. Thoroughly and without mercy. Meridian Atlantic is about to learn what happens when you discriminate against his daughter." The championship game was scheduled for 2 p.m. The Silverbrook girls arrived at the arena at noon for warm-ups, stretching, pre-game prep. The stands were filling with parents and scouts and basketball enthusiasts. This was the national finals, the biggest stage these girls had ever played on. At 1:45, 15 minutes before tip-off, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit walked into the arena. James Kingston had flown from Dubai to Portland in under 48 hours, crossing 11 time zones, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, but none of that showed on his face. What showed was focused, controlled intensity. He moved through the crowd to the Silverbrook section, where Marcus met him and pointed out where the team was warming up on the court. James found a seat in the front row of the stands, right behind the Silverbrook bench. He watched his daughter run through layup drills, her movements practiced and confident on the court even if she'd been uncertain everywhere else lately. And then, as if sensing his presence, Debby turned and looked up into the stands. Her eyes found her father and her whole face transformed. James Kingston, oil billionaire, CEO of a multinational corporation, one of the most powerful men in business, smiled and waved at his 9-year-old daughter, and she burst into tears right there on the basketball court. Coach Rothschild immediately called her over. "Debby, honey, what's wrong?" But Debby was looking past her coach, up at the stands, at her father who'd promised to watch from Dubai but had somehow crossed the world to be here. "My dad," she managed to say through tears. He came. James stood up from his seat and made his way down to courtside. Security tried to stop him. "You can't just walk onto the court during warm-ups," but Coach Rothschild waved them off. James knelt down and Debby ran to him, and father and daughter held each other while 11 other girls and 2 coaches and several hundred spectators watched this moment of pure love and relief. "I told you I'd be watching," James said into his daughter's hair. "I just didn't mention I'd be watching in person." Debby pulled back, wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself. "You flew all the way from Dubai? Baby girl, I'd fly around the world twice if it meant being here for your championship game. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. But your meeting. Some things are more important than meetings. You're more important than any meeting will ever be. Now you've got a championship to win. Can you do that for me? Can you play like the champion you are?" Debby nodded, wiping her face on her jersey. "I'll try. That's all I ask. And Debby? What happened on that plane, we're handling it. You don't need to carry that weight. You just need to be 9 years old and play basketball and let the grown-ups deal with the grown-up problems." "Okay. Okay, Dad." James hugged her one more time, then let her return to her team. He went back to his seat in the stands and the championship game began. The Silverbrook Academy Wildcats versus the Portland Valley Firebirds. A packed arena, championship banners hanging from the rafters, everything these girls had worked for coming down to one game. The ref blew the whistle for tip-off and they were playing. Debby started slowly, still emotional from seeing her father. She missed her first shot, turned the ball over once. But by the end of the first quarter, something shifted. She found her rhythm. She drove the lane for a layup. Hit a three-pointer from the corner, her favorite spot. Made a steal and went coast to coast. By halftime, Silverbrook was up by 8, and Debby had scored 11 points. The second half was intense. Portland Valley rallied, tied the game with 6 minutes left. The arena was deafening, both sides fans on their feet. Every possession mattered. Every basket counted. With 30 seconds left, the game was tied at 56. Silverbrook had possession. Coach Rothschild called timeout, gathered her girls, drew up a play. The play was for Sloane to drive and kick out to Hadley for a 3. But Coach looked at Debby, saw something in her eyes. Focus, determination, something that hadn't been there since before the flight. "Give the ball to Debby," Coach said. "Debby, you take the last shot." The girls nodded, broke the huddle, took the court. The ref handed the ball to Sloane for the inbound. The clock started. 25 seconds. Sloane passed to Debby at the top of the key. Debby dribbled, her defender tight on her. 20 seconds. She drove left, her defender stayed with her. 15 seconds. Debby crossed over, created space. 10 seconds. The defense collapsed on her. 5 seconds. Debby elevated from 15 feet, her defender's hand in her face, and released the ball. It arced through the air in slow motion, the entire arena holding its breath, and swished through the net with 2 seconds left. Silverbrook 58, Portland Valley 56. Portland tried to answer, a desperate heave from half-court that bounced off the rim, and the buzzer sounded. Championship game over. Silverbrook Academy had won the national finals, and Debby Kingston had scored the winning basket. The team exploded in celebration, dogpiling Debby, screaming and crying and hugging. Coach Rothschild and Coach Hayes were jumping up and down. The Silverbrook section of the stands erupted in cheers. And in the front row, James Kingston stood watching his daughter celebrate with tears streaming down his face. After the trophy presentation, after the team photos, after the initial celebration died down enough for people to actually move, James made his way down to the court again. Debby saw him coming and broke away from her teammates, running to meet him. He scooped her up in a hug, lifting her off the ground, and they both cried, relief and joy and the release of 3 days of tension and hurt. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mom would be so proud. You're a champion." Debby held on to her father tightly, and then she asked the question that had been haunting her since Tuesday night. "Dad, why did that lady hate me? I was polite. I said please. I did everything right. Why wasn't I good enough for a blanket?" James set her down gently, knelt so they were eye level, and held both her hands. Around them, the celebration continued, teammates hugging, parents taking photos, the noise of victory, but in this moment, it was just a father and his daughter. "Listen to me very carefully, Debby. Some people carry hate in their hearts, and it has nothing to do with the people they direct it at. That lady didn't hate you. She doesn't even know you. She hates an idea, a skin color, something that was taught to her or that she chose to believe. But it has nothing to do with who you are as a person. You did nothing wrong. You were polite, you said please, you handled yourself with grace and dignity even when you were being treated unfairly. You were perfect. She was the one who failed. Not you. Never you." Debby's eyes were full of tears again. "But it hurt, Dad. It still hurts. I know, baby girl. I know it hurts. And I'm sorry you had to experience that pain. I'm sorry the world isn't always fair, isn't always kind. But here's what I want you to remember. That lady's hate couldn't stop you from being a champion. It couldn't stop you from playing the game you love. It couldn't stop your teammates from loving you or your coaches from believing in you, or me from being the proudest father in the world. Her hate is small and powerless against the truth of who you are. Do you understand?" Debby nodded slowly, processing words that were maybe a little beyond her 9 years but that she'd remember for the rest of her life. "We're handling it," James continued. "The airline, the flight attendant, all of it. Justice is coming. But more importantly, you just won a national championship. You just hit the winning shot in the biggest game of your life. You just proved that nothing, not hate, not cruelty, not injustice, can stop Debby Kingston when she decides to be great. Your mother is watching and she's so proud. I'm so proud. Now go celebrate with your team." Debby hugged him one more time, then ran back to her teammates, who engulfed her in another celebration. James stood and watched, wiping his eyes, and Coach Rothschild approached him. "Hell of a game," she said. "Hell of a daughter," James replied. "For what it's worth, we've all got her back. This team, these girls, they love her. They've been protecting her since Tuesday night." James nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you for that. And thank you for everything you do for these girls." "It's my honor, Mr. Kingston. They're special kids. All of them." James looked out at the celebration, at 12 girls who'd stood up for their teammate, who'd channeled their anger into determination, who'd won a championship together. "Yes, they are." And in that moment, watching Debby laugh with her teammates, holding her championship trophy, wearing her mother's butterfly necklace and her father's proud smile, James Kingston made a silent promise. Cressida Vaughn's career was over. But more than that, he'd make sure no other child would ever experience what his daughter experienced. He'd make sure Meridian Atlantic changed its policies, its training, its systems. He'd make sure this moment of hate turned into a catalyst for real, lasting change. Because that's what happens when you underestimate the power of a father's love and a 9-year-old's courage. The celebration continued in Portland, but back in New York, in a corporate office 3,000 miles away, Documents were being prepared for a meeting that would take place in less than 12 hours. A meeting where Cressida Vaughn would face the consequences of 3 years of deliberate cruelty, 17 ignored complaints, and 1 blanket she'd refused to give to a child. The revelation was complete. The pattern was undeniable. And justice, delayed but not denied, was finally coming. If this story has moved you, if you believe that standing up to discrimination matters, hit that subscribe button right now, because the final chapter, where justice is served and real change happens, is something you need to see. And here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed subtle discrimination that others dismissed as not a big deal? How did you respond? Share your story in the comments, because recognizing these patterns is the first step to stopping them. 4 days after Flight 2847 landed in Portland on Monday, March 20th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Cressida Vaughn received a phone call that would change her life forever. It was HR Director Paula Vasquez, her voice professional but cold, instructing Cressida to report to corporate headquarters immediately for a mandatory meeting. No explanation. No context. Just, immediately, and mandatory. Cressida had been home since completing her rotation, enjoying her days off, unaware of the investigation that had been consuming Meridian Atlantic's executive offices for 72 hours straight. She'd thought about Flight 2847 a few times. There'd been that uncomfortable moment with the chaperone. The basketball team had seemed upset, but she dismissed it. Passengers got upset all the time. It would blow over like everything else always did. She was wrong. Cressida arrived at corporate headquarters at 10:30 a.m., still in her civilian clothes, confused about why she'd been summoned on her day off. She was directed to a large conference room on the executive floor, a room she'd never been in before. The kind of room where important decisions were made, where careers were built or destroyed. When she opened the door, her stomach dropped. Sitting around the conference table were CEO Richard Halstead, a man whose face she'd only seen in company newsletters and all-hands meetings. Senior Vice President Douglas Montclair, who she'd never met but whose reputation for thoroughness was legendary. HR Director Paula Vasquez, stone-faced and holding a thick folder. And 3 people from the legal department, also with folders, also looking grim. This wasn't a routine meeting. This was a tribunal. "Ms. Vaughn, please sit down," Richard Halstead said, gesturing to the single chair on the opposite side of the table from the executives. Cressida sat, her hands clasped in her lap, her heart beginning to race. The power dynamic was clear, her alone on one side, 6 people on the other, all of them holding documents she couldn't see. Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Vaughn, we're here to discuss Flight 2847, which you worked on Tuesday, March 14th from JFK to Portland. Are you aware of why we might need to discuss that flight?" Cressida's mind raced. The basketball team. The blanket. The man who'd confronted her. But she kept her face neutral, professional. "I'm not sure what you're referring to. It was a routine flight." Douglas Montclair opened his folder and pulled out a printed document. "We received a formal complaint from Marcus Whitfield on behalf of James Kingston regarding discriminatory treatment of a 9-year-old passenger named Debby Kingston. The complaint alleges that you deliberately denied this child a blanket during night service while providing blankets to every other passenger in business class, then instructed junior flight attendants to lie about inventory when the child requested one." Cressida felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "That's absolutely not what happened. We ran out of blankets. It was an inventory issue, not." "We have testimony from both Tallulah Brixton and Gemma Hollis," Paula Vasquez interrupted, her voice sharp. "They were both present during the incident. They've both confirmed, independently, that there were blankets available and that you specifically instructed them to tell the passenger we'd run out. Would you like to revise your statement?" Cressida's hands tightened in her lap. Tallulah and Gemma had talked. Of course they had. Junior attendants always caved under pressure. "If there was a miscommunication about inventory, I apologize, but I assure you it wasn't intentional. I've been flying for 15 years. I've served thousands of passengers with excellence. This is a misunderstanding." Douglas pulled out another document, this one much thicker. "Ms. Vaughn, over the past 4 days, we've conducted a comprehensive review of your employment history. We've found 17 separate passenger complaints filed against you over the past 3 years. Would you like to know what all 17 complaints have in common?" Cressida said nothing, but her face had gone from pale to ashen. "Every single complainant," Douglas continued, his voice hard, "was a black passenger. Every single complaint described the same pattern of behavior: being skipped over, being ignored, requests denied, services that were available to other passengers mysteriously unavailable to them. 17 passengers over 3 years, Ms. Vaughn. That's not a coincidence. That's not a series of misunderstandings. That's a deliberate pattern of discriminatory behavior. People complain all the time, Cressida said, her voice rising slightly, desperation creeping in. You can't possibly think that every complaint means. We also have internal emails, Paula said, sliding several printed emails across the table. Emails where you complained about certain passengers and challenging demographics and difficult routes that required extra vigilance. We have testimony from former crew members who described your treatment of black colleagues as cold and hostile. We have a statement from a black flight attendant who transferred off your routes because she felt the work environment was discriminatory, though she was afraid to file a formal complaint at the time. Cressida stared at the emails, recognizing her own words, seeing them through different eyes now. Words she'd thought were careful and vague suddenly looked damning when compiled together, when viewed as part of a pattern. Richard Halstead leaned forward, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Ms. Vaughn, we also have testimony from 2 of your fellow crew members on Flight 2847. Tallulah Brixton and Gemma Hollis have both confirmed, in detailed interviews, that you deliberately withheld a blanket from a child and instructed them to lie about inventory. They watched you walk past this child without acknowledging her. They heard you tell Tallulah to say we'd run out when there were clearly blankets available. They witnessed you threaten the child's chaperone when he tried to intervene. They saw you ignore the child again during deplaning. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Ms. Vaughn. This was deliberate discrimination against a 9-year-old child. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Cressida opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. What could she say? The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. She'd been so careful for so long, and now it was all crashing down because of one child, one blanket, one moment where she'd been certain no one powerful enough to matter would care. She'd been wrong about that too. Cressida started, her voice shaking now, all professional composure gone. It wasn't. I've been with this company for 15 years. I've won awards. I've had excellent performance reviews. You can't possibly believe that I would deliberately. Paula Vasquez cut her off, her voice like ice. Ms. Vaughn, effective immediately, you are terminated from Meridian Atlantic Airways for gross violation of company anti-discrimination policy and code of conduct. Your behavior has created a hostile environment for passengers and crew members, damaged the company's reputation, and violated the core values we claim to uphold. Your employment is terminated as of this moment. Cressida felt like she'd been physically struck. No, you can't do this. I have 15 years with this company. I have seniority, I have rights, You have the right to consult with an attorney, Richard Halstead said, standing up. But your employment with Meridian Atlantic is over. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. You'll receive information about your final paycheck and COBRA benefits in the mail. This meeting is concluded. I'll fight this, Cressida said, her voice desperate now, all pretense of calm shattered. I'll sue. I'll go to the media. I'll tell everyone that you're destroying my career over one mistake, one misunderstanding. If you choose to pursue legal action, that's your right, one of the lawyers said calmly. But I'd advise you to consider very carefully whether you want this case in the public eye. We have 17 complaints, testimony from multiple crew members, documented evidence of a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and a 9-year-old victim who happens to be the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in America. If this goes public, Ms. Vaughn, your career in aviation will be over everywhere, not just at Meridian Atlantic. But that's a decision for you and your attorney to make. The door opened and 2 security officers entered. Cressida looked around the room one more time, at the executives who'd just ended her career, at the folders full of evidence she couldn't deny, at the faces that showed no sympathy, no second chances, no room for plausible deniability anymore. 15 years. Gone in 20 minutes. She stood on shaking legs and walked out of the conference room between the 2 security officers. They escorted her to her locker where she collected her personal belongings, a few photos, some extra makeup, a change of clothes, and then walked her out of the building through a side exit where no other employees would see her. By 11:15 a.m., Cressida Vaughn was standing on a Manhattan sidewalk, holding a cardboard box with 15 years of her life inside it, and her career in aviation was over. She'd been so careful, so strategic, so certain that her subtle discrimination would never be noticed, never be challenged, never have consequences. She'd underestimated 2 things: the power of witnesses and the determination of a father who loved his daughter more than Cressida understood hate. Back inside the conference room, the executives sat in heavy silence for a moment after Cressida left. "That was necessary," Richard Halstead said finally. "But it's not enough. Terminating one employee doesn't fix the systemic failures that allowed this to continue for 3 years." Douglas nodded. "We need comprehensive reform. New policies, new training, new accountability measures." "Already working on it," Paula said. "I've been coordinating with our diversity and inclusion team. We're implementing several major changes." Over the next 48 hours, Meridian Atlantic moved quickly. They knew James Kingston was watching. They knew the media would eventually get this story. They knew their response needed to be swift, substantial, and sincere. On Wednesday, March 22, Meridian Atlantic issued a public statement. It was published on their website, sent to major media outlets, and posted on all their social media channels. The statement read, "Meridian Atlantic Airways sincerely apologizes to Debby Kingston and the Kingston family for the discriminatory treatment she experienced on Flight 2847. The behavior displayed by our employee was inexcusable, violated our company values, and contradicted everything we claim to stand for as an airline. The employee in question has been terminated. But we recognize that terminating one individual is not sufficient. We failed to identify and address a pattern of discriminatory behavior over several years, and that failure is on us as an organization. Effective immediately, Meridian Atlantic is implementing the following changes." The changes were comprehensive. First, a complete review of all customer service complaints from the past 5 years, specifically looking for patterns that might indicate discrimination. Any patterns found would trigger immediate investigations. Second, mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all flight crew, not just a one-time session but ongoing training that would be required annually to maintain employment. Third, a new passenger reporting system that would allow travelers to flag discriminatory treatment in real time through the airline's app, with complaints routed directly to a dedicated team rather than getting lost in general customer service. Fourth, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, with clear consequences and third-party oversight to ensure accountability. No more dismissing complaints as misunderstandings. No more burying individual incidents in aggregate data. Fifth, a commitment to diversity in hiring and promotion, ensuring that the faces of Meridian Atlantic reflected the diversity of the passengers they served. The statement concluded, "We cannot undo the harm caused to Debby Kingston, but we can ensure that our response to this incident creates lasting change that prevents other passengers from experiencing similar treatment. We are committed to being better, doing better, and holding ourselves accountable." James Kingston, from his office in Greenwich after returning from Portland, issued his own statement in response. "I appreciate Meridian Atlantic's swift action and comprehensive response. This was never about revenge or destroying careers. It was about ensuring that no other child experiences what my daughter experienced. Real change requires accountability, and I'm pleased to see Meridian Atlantic taking genuine steps toward systemic reform. My family has accepted the company's apology, and will be monitoring their progress on these commitments." Meridian Atlantic had also offered Debby and her entire basketball team free flights for life, a gesture meant to show good faith. James Kingston accepted on behalf of the girls, but he made one additional request. Any financial settlement offered to the Kingston family should instead be donated to youth basketball programs in underserved communities across the country. Meridian Atlantic agreed, donating $500,000 to a fund that would provide equipment, coaching, travel support, and scholarships for young basketball players who might not otherwise have access to competitive programs. The fund was named in honor of Debby's mother, the Catherine Kingston Youth Athletics Foundation. What Cressida Vaughn had meant as a small act of casual cruelty, denying a child a blanket, had transformed into something larger. Policy changes at a major airline. Mandatory training that would reach thousands of employees. A reporting system that would empower passengers. A $500,000 fund supporting young athletes. And one 9-year-old girl who would grow up knowing that standing up for yourself, even when you're scared and cold and don't understand why someone hates you, can change the world. 3 weeks after the incident in early April, Debby Kingston sat in her bedroom in Greenwich, Connecticut. The championship trophy from the national finals sat on her dresser, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Her Silverbrook warm-up jacket hung on the back of her desk chair. And on her bed, legs crossed, her mother's butterfly necklace around her neck, Debby had her journal open in her lap. She'd been writing more since the incident. Processing. Trying to understand. Making sense of something that didn't quite make sense but that she knew she needed to work through. Her pen moved across the page in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. Dear Mom, something happened on our trip to Portland. A lady on the airplane was mean to me because of how I look. She wouldn't give me a blanket like she gave everyone else. I was really sad and confused. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, but Dad says I didn't do anything wrong. He says some people carry hate in their hearts and it has nothing to do with the people they're mean to. Debbie paused, touched the butterfly necklace at her throat, then continued writing. Dad says sometimes bad things happen so good things can change. The airline is different now because of what happened to me. They're going to teach their workers to be better. They're going to listen when people say they were treated unfairly. And Dad gave money to help kids like me play basketball and he named it after you. Coach Rothschild says I'm brave, but Mom, I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just cold and I wanted a blanket. I still don't understand why that lady hated me. Maybe I never will. But Dad says I don't have to understand hate to stand up to it. He says just asking for what you deserve, even when someone wants to make you feel like you don't deserve it, that's standing up. That's being brave. She wrote for several more minutes, filling 2 pages with her thoughts, her questions, her processing of an experience no child should have to process. Then she wrote, We won the championship, Mom. I hit the winning shot. Dad flew all the way from Dubai to watch. He said you were watching too from wherever you are. I hope you saw it. I hope you're proud of me. Not just for basketball but for speaking up. For asking for a blanket even when I was scared. For writing about it in this journal you gave me. For not letting that lady make me feel small. Debbie closed the journal and held it against her chest, looking out her bedroom window at the Connecticut spring afternoon. Trees were budding. Birds were singing. Life was continuing. And she was different now than she'd been 3 weeks ago. Not broken, not diminished, but changed. She'd learned something hard about the world, but she'd also learned something powerful about herself. She was Debby Kingston. She was 10 years old now. Her birthday had been 2 weeks ago. She still played basketball. She still loved flying despite everything. She still carried her mother's journal everywhere. She still wore the butterfly necklace every single day. And she still believed that she deserved to be treated with dignity, no matter what anyone else thought. Downstairs, she could hear her father on a business call, his voice carrying up the stairs. He was back to running his empire, but he still made it to every one of her basketball games. Some promises you keep forever. Debbie stood up, tucked her journal into her backpack and headed downstairs. She had practice in an hour. The Silverbrook Academy team was already preparing for next season, already talking about defending their championship title. Life moved forward. But this story, this moment, this blanket that was never given, it would stay with Debby Kingston for the rest of her life. Not as a wound that never healed but as a reminder. A reminder that speaking up matters. That standing up for yourself matters. That one voice, even a small voice, even a 9-year-old voice that's cold and scared and doesn't understand why someone hates her, can change everything. Debby Kingston is 10 years old now. She still plays basketball, she's working on her crossover dribble and her defensive footwork. She still loves flying, and true to Meridian Atlantic's promise, she and her team flew back to another tournament just last month, this time treated with the dignity and respect every passenger deserves. She still carries her mother's journal everywhere, still writes in it almost every night, still processes the world through the pages her mother gave her. And Cressida Vaughn? Her career in aviation ended that day in the conference room. She never flew again. She tried to find work in other industries, but the story eventually became public. A LinkedIn post from a former colleague picked up by a blog, eventually making its way to larger news outlets. Her name became associated with discrimination, with cruelty toward a child, with the kind of subtle racism that hides behind professional smiles and plausible deniability until one day it doesn't hide anymore. But more importantly than what happened to Cressida Vaughn, more importantly than one person's ended career, Meridian Atlantic Airways actually changed. The policies they announced weren't just press release promises, they were implemented, monitored, enforced. Flight crews went through the new bias training, and it wasn't a token gesture but a genuine examination of implicit bias and its real-world consequences. The new reporting system gave passengers a voice, and the company actually listened. In the first 6 months after the policy changes, Meridian Atlantic identified and addressed 12 other situations where passengers had been treated unfairly, where subtle discrimination had been happening beneath the radar. Some resulted in additional terminations. Others in mandatory retraining. But in every case, the passenger's complaint was taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, and acted upon decisively. The Catherine Kingston Youth Athletics Foundation has, to date, supported over 300 young athletes in underserved communities, providing equipment, coaching, tournament travel, and college prep support for kids who love basketball but don't have the resources to pursue it competitively. Debby attends some of the foundation events with her father, meets these kids, sees her mother's name creating opportunities, sees how one bad moment on an airplane transformed into countless good moments for children across the country. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it doesn't come with dramatic courtroom scenes or impassioned speeches or revolutionary upheaval. Sometimes justice starts with a 9-year-old girl asking politely for a blanket, being told no because of the color of her skin, and having a father who refused to accept that hate should ever go unchallenged. Sometimes justice is the quiet accumulation of policy changes and training sessions and reporting systems and terminated employees and foundations that bear your mother's name. Debby's story reminds us that standing up to discrimination isn't about being fearless. It's not about being powerful or wealthy or connected or having the perfect response in the moment. Sometimes standing up to discrimination is just being cold and scared and 9 years old on an airplane, and still believing that you deserve to be treated with the same basic dignity as everyone else around you. It's pressing the call button and saying, "Excuse me, I didn't get a blanket. Could I have one please?" Even when every instinct tells you to stay quiet, to not make waves, to accept less because someone in authority has decided that's all you deserve. It's sitting there for 3 hours, shivering while everyone else sleeps in comfort, and writing in your journal about why someone hated you when you did nothing wrong. It's your teammates rallying around you, your coach marching to the galley in fury, a chaperone documenting everything because he knows this matters. It's your father on the other side of the world refusing to let it go, refusing to accept these things happen, refusing to allow his daughter's pain to be dismissed as a minor inconvenience. And sometimes when all those pieces come together, a child's courage, witnesses who care, documentation, determination, and the power to demand accountability, sometimes justice actually happens. Not perfect justice. Not justice that erases the hurt or makes the memory disappear. But justice that says this was wrong, this will have consequences, and we will change so it doesn't happen again. What would you have done in that moment? If you were Debby, would you have asked for the blanket or stayed quiet? If you were Marcus Whitfield, would you have confronted the flight attendant or let it go? If you were one of the Silverbrook girls, would you have offered your blanket or stayed out of it? If you were James Kingston, would you have pursued it this far? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're real questions about how we respond to injustice, how we support each other, how we decide what's worth fighting for and what we let slide. Debby Kingston made her choice at 9 years old. She asked for a blanket. She believed she deserved one. And that belief, that simple conviction that she was worthy of the same treatment as everyone else, changed an entire airline's policies and created a foundation that's changing hundreds of young lives. Your choices matter too. Your voice matters. Your willingness to stand up, speak up, document, support, and refuse to accept discrimination as just how things are, that matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if speaking up would make a difference? Have you ever been treated unfairly and found the courage to say something? Share your story because every story matters, every voice matters, and sometimes the collective weight of people refusing to stay silent is what finally tips the scales toward justice. And if this story moved you, if Debby's courage and James Kingston's determination and Meridian Atlantic's accountability restored even a fraction of your faith that justice is possible, hit that subscribe button right now. Because there are more stories like this that need to be told, more moments of courage that deserve to be remembered, more proof that standing up to hate, discrimination, and injustice isn't futile, it's powerful. Debby Kingston asked for a blanket. And because she did, because she believed she deserved one, the world changed just a little bit. Imagine what could happen if we all held on to that same belief, that we all deserve dignity, respect, and basic human kindness, and that when those things are denied, speaking up isn't just our right but our responsibility. Subscribe, comment, share this story. And the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, remember a 9-year-old girl on an airplane who was cold, scared, confused, but still believed she deserved better. Because she did. And so do you. And so does everyone.